the academy where we discuss and seek a change in long-term athletic development. My name is Ben Wellenbach, and I'm the dad of two girls, strength coach, and owner of Be Well Fitness. It is my desire to help shift and educate the way our current culture operates regarding long-term athletic development. Today, we are fortunate to have two great guests joining us. They both met at Springfield College, and from all outside perspective, they would have never turned out to be lifelong friends. They have both shifted the way we see and operate in the performance industry. If you had the pleasure of spending any time around the two of them, you would clearly see that they hold many principles in the same and in regard to performance and coaching. I do not believe in coincidences anymore. I almost had the opportunity to train with John Torine when I was playing college hockey, but our schedules never lined up. Then I ran into him again in 2007 as he was helping to certify coaches during the initial phases of the functional movement screen systems. 10 years later, I met my current coach, Will Chung. During a conversation one day, JT's name came up. He told me about their connection and friendship. We both laughed at my weak attempts. 1 year later, we finally spent some quality time together, shared a meal and stories as JT attended our annual training. During his presentation, JT quoted and gave credit to many of his influences. Will would call that rupa, or lineage, which reveals where you came from and what you stand for. This is exactly what we're seeking to do. Understand where our development came from and what we stand for so we can ultimately move in the direction we want to take. As I do with every guest on the podcast, I will pair each guest with a sneaker from the Nike collection that best represents them. In 1985, Nike was seeking to bring new energy to the college basketball scene through the Dunk collection. But what they created wound up becoming something far greater than just basketball. It spanned over art, fashion, music, and global culture. I've chosen the Nike Dunk Low in, quote, has gone fishing colorway for John because it shows the framework of a shoe comparing to the framework and principles of coaching and leadership expanding over various fields into a love of his, fishing. Who would have thought a 1985 college basketball shoe would connect to fishing? This is a great representation of his principles of leadership connecting to any leader in any field. When you prove a shoe like the Dunk can connect to anyone, you open the door to artists to redesign and reshape what seems one-dimensional into a multi-dimensional universe. This is what Will has done for movement. His lineage and history rooted in martial arts has helped him reverse engineer movement. Virgil Abloh created a fashion label called Off-White. It was his expression of fashion, and Nike took I. The two collaborated on many historic shoe designs. One of those designs is the Nike Off-White Blazer, which is what I picked for Will in white and university red colorway. It took one of the original model shoes and reconstructed it with design features from many of the Nike other popular shoes. There are pieces from Jordans, Dunks, and all condition gear in bold colors. Virgil was inspired by various aspects of and shapes featured in basketball, skateboarding, and trail running, and he took that inspiration, reconsidered them in a new light. His creativity and playful approach allowed the collaboration with Nike to build a historic creation. This creative and collaborative approach is what Will does with his bespoke training, putting the personal in personal training. So coaches, welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time to share some lessons learned for long-term athletic development.
Thank you, Ben. That was an incredibly thoughtful, well done piece that didn't just spin out of your head 20 minutes ago. Thank you for your generosity of time in that.
My pleasure. You both have earned it, and I wanted to honor that. So the way I typically start is by asking what people's own experiences were with sports and activities growing up. And to me, it shows their history and what they're rooted in. So I thought it might be interesting to start there and see where you all started your journey from a movement and sport activity standpoint. So, Will, would you start?
Sure. Thank you for having us both. And yeah, predominantly my background has been in martial arts. My grandfather was Hwang, so he had influenced and trained many people such as Chuck Norris and Shaquille O'Neal and people of such ilk. And so I've trained as all my uncles and my father all trained. And at one point, because it wasn't really popular with children until later Karate Kid and Ninja Turtle movies came about. So I got to spend a lot of time with adults who I'm still close with to this day. So when I was 7 or 12, they were, in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So now I see them and I visit them in retirement communities. and and places, and I still get together with them for dinner and so forth and so on. And these were men who influenced my upbringing, as a person. And my uncle, what led me down this path was basically like, you're a little small and you're getting knocked around quite a bit, you may want to look into lifting some weights or something to supplement the martial arts training. And that's all I needed, was that kind of permission from my uncle and my instructor that this was something that was necessary or recommended for me. And that just led that whole path. I wouldn't consider myself much of an athlete. I played soccer for a bit, and the only reason I was good at soccer was my legs were strong for martial arts. So it wasn't even necessarily a skill thing. I played fullback, and whenever the ball came to me, they told me to kick the ball as hard as I could upfield, and that's why they called me Boomer. Because even as recent as social media, David Gerson, a childhood friend, tagged me in a group photo of us playing soccer together because one of our teammates was Claudio Reyna, and his son is currently on the U.S. team and has been on the team before. So, when he was wishing the team good luck and talking about FIFA, he kind of pulled out the glory picture of us all being on the same team as his father. And the subtle yet significant difference that people noted, or, the fact that I had a bowl cut, so I had hair, but my legs were also twice the size of every other kid's legs. And that was only because of the martial arts, the stance training, the jumping, the kicking, all that. So, and it was pretty significant. Like, you could see the size of my thighs versus the other kids, again, just from just exposure and conditioning. So that's the extent of my uh, storied athletic career, because I predominantly focused on martial arts. And I think I have one soccer championship. As they said in the Marvel movie Thunderbolts, the Thunderbolts sponsored by Shane's Tires. That's about the peak of my athletic development.
When you were, when you were studying, martial arts, was it something you felt obligated to do? Was it something that you uh, uh, felt pushed or pressured into, or is it something that you genuinely found a love for and you wanted to do?
Initially, I begged my father, to teach me, and he had no interest. And he like litmus test me by saying, "Hey, can you stay in a horse stance for 10 minutes?" And then I would do it, and then he'd be like, "How about 30 minutes?" And then he'd be like, how about 60 minutes? Right. Like he pulled that game with me for a while. And that, I was in kindergarten at the time. And so he had zero interest in really teaching me. Later on, he told me he wanted me to train with the best, and at that point, we weren't near my uncle, who was his brother in law, who he considered was one of the best teachers of four gentlemen that he knew and was friends with. And he said, these were the four men, and your uncle is the one I chose, obviously, out of all those gentlemen. And my dad's, and the reason why I'm a striker versus a grappler, and you know, John's got a background in judo with Shimamoto, and I've met his instructor. John and I go way back. We have a long history together. But uh, when I asked my dad in grade school about judo, I asked him because he was the third dan in judo. I said in Yudo, which is Korean judo. I asked him what judo was. I asked him about judo. I had interest in judo, and he just grabbed my arm and flipped me onto the coffee table and broke the coffee table, which really upset my mother, and it knocked the wind out of me because I wasn't expecting it, to be honest with you. So, it was my one glimpse of the Pink Panther, Kato experience of in the household. So that discouraged me from grappling because I was like, okay, so that really sucks. So I'm just gonna stick with striking.
Well, I asked the question mainly because some of the challenges that are faced. The statistic is 70% of kids are quitting sports by the age of 13,
Right.
and like that's an astounding number.
Yeah.
And the number one reason that they cite, it's not because they're not winning. It's not because of like, of what people might think. It's actually even more simple than what you would assume. They're just not having fun. And,
That's a great
you
point.
know, I ask about the want and or desire for you to practice because I think that is a huge correlation between how far you went in martial arts and your passion and love for it still today, and you know let's say your passion and love for soccer, which was not anything more than a sandlot game, so
Right.
anyways, JT, what tell me about your upbringing.
Well, there's a couple of things. If just before that,
Yeah.
one, I think Will, or as I'm really glad to learn today, Boomer, which I didn't know. I mean, that's been in the holster. That's been in the holster a long time. So that's good stuff there. But I think Boomer is understating the level of mastery he's truly attained and continues to go after. Um, he's a humble man. He won't say it, but we're dealing with a rare cat here in many ways. It's certainly in martial arts as well.
Agreed.
His family lineage. Most people participate. They don't start a discipline. Most of us are participants, if we're lucky. To the just real quick, I'm sure we'll get into it, but the you mentioned kids quitting because it's not fun. I would highly encourage anybody to go take a look at the research done by Amanda Visick at a George Washington University, who actually went and did something incredibly novel years ago and actually asked the kids what they thought. Amazing concept. Or actually asked the kids. And she, I'm sure there's others, but she was at the forefront of going, they say it's not fun. Well, the three of us alone might have different definitions of fun. She actually went and found a distinction of what fun is. And fun just doesn't mean grab ass or horseplay. You know, it has a distinction. If you go look at her research, she actually came up with 81 determinants of fun in 11 categories, and it's really it's incredible. She did that, God, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, and continues to do this amazing research that we'd all be better off if we just followed that. As far as my athletic background, this will be quick. I appreciate you. You know, it's the only time I've ever been associated with dunking or Nike Dunk or anything like that athletically would be dunking a donut in a cup of coffee. That's about as athletic as I got or get. But you know, as a young kid, I you know, you do all the sports when you're young and all that. And then I found judo as my dad took judo and all that, but I fell in love with football. But then I really fell in love with the preparation of football because I realized that. Sorry about that.
You're fine.
I looked around and I realized first my gene pool was basically a cesspool, and you know, what can I do to maximize whatever I have physically? And fortunately for me, I had seen previous years before me some kids getting real health issues with illegal substances and drugs, and it scared the hell out of me. And not thank God anything for them, but I'm glad I was witness to that, because now I was like, all right, I don't want to run down that road, because who knows if I may have. Okay, now what do I do with whatever I have? And so I began, and in those days, I really, you know, everything was just about the neck down. You know, how do you get bigger, faster, stronger? Bah, 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 bah. And I became obsessed with that, with how do you prepare and train and all that, and you know, for its own sake, for the sake of yourself and being the best you can be for yourself and the team, but also to overcome, you know, deficiencies that I knew I had. And you know, soon found out that it was about the neck up. And that's really where I started to really become interested in how can you do this. And I started helping the younger kids, and then I started having conversations with people. When I was 16 years old, Johnny Parker, who was a strength coach of the Giants for years, stayed on the phone with me for 45 minutes and just talked to me about, I never forgot it, obviously, about training. I was like, oh, there's a profession, like this thing exists. This. All I wanted to do was play college football. And so I had my sights set on college football. My head coach had a bit of a disagreement in that. In the end, he was probably right. But my defensive coordinator, Ed Purdy, was played football at this school called Springfield College. And he said to me, look, John, if you want to go be a strength coach and if you want to play football, you ought to go to Springfield. That's where you ought to go. And at that time, we were Division II. And I was barely built for Division III. But he encouraged me to go, and he said, look, football is going to end, whether it ends in a day or 4 years, that's where you need to be. And I'm like, I'm no geography expert, but that seems like it's north. I'm trying to go down to Florida and unfreeze here. He goes, get your ass up there, and that's where you belong. And thank God he said that. Unfortunately, I met Will there, so there's some downsides. But I'm just kidding. Boomer. But So that's where it was, and that became my lifelong curiosity, my lifelong obsession, which has spun into so many different ways of looking at it and ways of being with it.
All right, so let's take me back to Springfield College for you both. I've heard like a brief version from Will of how the two of you guys met and ran into each other, and I would love your take, JT, on what has kept you guys, what was it initially and what has kept you guys close this whole time?
You ever see a stray dog that you feel bad for? Kind of like that. No, I'm just kidding. I'll keep. Will and I met my freshman year, spring. But everything that goes along with the culture and the art of it, and the training and the whole thing about it. So I was immediately fascinated, and Will hasn't shared but a percent of his true family story. But I'll say this: Will, as you know, is I'm not sure I know anybody that relationships are more important to, and Will, that's very important to him, and because it's so important to him, we hadn't spoke not over anything negative, just we hadn't spoken in a while, like you do, and I believe it was a girl Will was dating at the time or something, had seen something and told Will, and Will, being Will, like reached out and we reconnected, and I'm grateful he did. And so I really thank him for that. It's I can't take any credit for that, but I do appreciate that. So we go back a long ways.
Yeah. Why'd you reach out, Will?
Well, needed a few bucks.
Yeah, he owed me money. I wanted my $2. And let me rewind. First of all, just to give John, and I refer to him as JT, since we were kids, but and I had hair, but to show how diligent he was as a student of not only of the game, to humble to learn and hungry to learn. Like he said, he was on the phone with the strength coach for the Giants for an hour at a young age. When we were in the gym, he consistently kept a notebook and kept records. He was the only person at that time in that gym that I saw was actually recording his workouts, to give you an idea of how diligent of a student he was back then as a football player, as a freshman coming in. And that leads us into, we were in Gulick Hall 2A, and it's like an L wing, freshman dorm, crappy dorm, tiny windows. And, half of our floor really enjoyed the camaraderie. So of us, half of the wing stayed because we didn't want to upgrade to the lottery where, with your roommate, you would end up in a dorm room, but you would break up the crew or the gang. Didn't want to do that. So half of us stayed and half the wing left. So half of the wing got filled up by a bunch of friends. And, John, and how we met was I was sitting in the common area. Also, your recollection, you can confirm or that he basically was offended because he asked if we were making fun of Jews, and I said yes. We were, Chinks, Polacks, and Guineas, and every imaginable racial slur without any malice. And then he went on to state proudly, almost like reenacting a scene from School Ties, saying, "Well, I'm Jewish." And I said, "Well, good for you. I'm Korean." Right. And then I told him I probably had been to more bar mitzvahs than he had, and started to recite part of the Torah to him. And then he's like, "Where are you from?" And then when I realized, my uncle lived in Springfield and he lived in Livingston, which was not too far, Springfield, New Jersey, and Livingston, it's the same county. That then we became friends from then on, and he hasn't been able to get rid of me. And what happened is we had lost touch. We stayed in touch when you were at the Bills, right? And he was very gracious. He's like, "Hey, you want to come up and visit and all that?" And I'm not a big football fan. I asked how. I distinctly remember, like, you know, uh, what was there to do, and it was cold, and it was football. And I said, "How are the cheerleaders?" He's like, "We're not allowed to fraternize." I said, "I have no interest at that point, right?" And then we had lost touch for a little bit, and then John knows Chris Coxton, my old roommate, called me and said, never guess who's on the sidelines for the Colts." I said, "Who?" He's like, "John." I was like, "No kidding." So then I called John. I actually called the stadium, the Colts, and there was a directory, and I punched in the directory. Then I reconnected with John at that point, and then we lost touch. And then that's when an old girlfriend found John for me, because I wanted to reconnect with him. Since then, he hasn't been able to get rid of me. I show up at his house. I mean, he just moved recently, so I don't know where he currently lives. So, but once he let me know where he lived, he had no choice. But now he's got an out now.
That's why we moved.
Well,
Uh, so okay, so now we're past Springfield College. John, you're with the Bills. I know we're maybe vastly fast forwarding through certain things, but I want to kind of talk about the Bills and also the Colts, but from a, let's say, a culture standpoint. And I bring that up because Will also has had the opportunity to be a part of other teams, whether it's a country's martial art team that he was coaching, or various other teams. And what I guess my hypothesis is that more would participate and stay active and develop better if the leadership and the team was better. So the environment and culture was there to aid in that. So I'm going to go to you, JT, first, with both the experience with the Bills, but also, I mean, you've got a Super Bowl championship with the Colts, and there's something really special about championship teams, and I'm curious what that is for you.
Well, it takes great players, but but it takes a lot of things. But the Peyton Mannings and Marvin Harrisons and Reggie Waynes and Dallas Clarks and Jeff Saturdays and Bob Sanders and the rest of them, that matters, of course. When we have a huge the culture is a really important word that, like many words, has gotten completely washed out, right? But it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. But you have to create alignment on what the distinction of culture is, and you got to get clarity on it by communicating what it is. And what it is what it means here. Like we don't have to have agreement. If I said the word integrity to all three of us, we'd all three have different definitions of integrity, right? I'm asking you to get alignment on this distinction called integrity at this place at this time. We can talk about all the other definitions, and they're all great and matter, and maybe not here at this time. So when Tony Dungy stands up in front of the team on his first day and talks about, before he says anything else, before he starts anything else, and Tony Dungy, because I or anybody else that has been around him or fortunate enough to work for him, or even pass by him, could talk about him till the end of the world. But I always say this to sum it up: if you know anything about the Dalai Lama, there you go. Yeah, the book title is actually so appropriate. But I tell people, when the Dalai Lama is confused about life, he calls Tony. Right. That, just to sum up Tony real quick. But Tony stands up and he says, look, guys, football is, for me, and I don't expect it to be different for you or any higher, is the third most important thing in my life. And it's not even close. And that's what I told the owner before he gave me a lot of money. Look, this is the third most important thing. First is faith, the second is family, and the third is football. And that wasn't some guy talking in front of the room just to talk. That wasn't some guy hanging stuff up on a wall. These are our values and all that. They weren't even hanging on the wall. I can tell you the four things we had hanging on the wall when Tony was there. There was about four words. That was it. But anyway, and he said, look, I don't care what your faith is, whatever it is, fantastic. But that's first. It's first for me. Second is family, whatever that means to you, whatever it is. And so family's going to be second. And then third is going to be football. And then he said, look, we're going to win here. Like, we got the people in the room. We're going to win here. And we're going to win a certain way. And now this was Peyton's, going into Peyton's fifth year. We hadn't won a playoff game yet. I was there to start his rookie year as well, and all that, right? So we're trying to find our way. And he said, we're going to win. And the way we're going to win is we're going to be pillars in the community. And we're like, what is this guy talking about? Like, what the hell's the community got to do with us winning? Like, Peyton's got to throw touchdowns. Like, that's how we're going to win, And so he said, and when a kid has one of your jerseys on, I want the mother to feel proud that child's wearing your jersey. Now, he didn't get up there and spat off a bunch of rules. And he said, we're going to win anyway. But if we win and the mother's not proud of the child wearing the jersey and we're not pillars in the community, that means every Tuesday we're going to be out in the community doing things. It's just not going to feel as good. That was the start of his tenure with us. And I know he did the same thing in Tampa, and I know he had been doing it for years anyway, right? And, I mean, he turned Tampa around. And that's how we started. And we're like, is this guy serious? Like, what is this, right? And I've got 9,000 stories to back up every single one of those things that he said, including my own personal story. One of the only time Tony got mad at me, my wife was pregnant with my first child, and he had found out I didn't go to one of her appointments with her, like checking, one of the 25 appointments they have. And she had told me not to come. And I'll spare you the details of the story for sake of this, but he found out. He restated, this was the only time he got mad at me since I've known him. Not about my job, not about football, not about a loss or nothing. And he said, John, when I say faith, family, and football, it sounds like you put football before family. that's out of order. And that's not what we're doing here. And so what you're going to do is go to every single one of her appointments, on her schedule, at her convenience, not yours. I don't care when you make the appointment, but it'll be at her convenience, not yours, because it sounds like you made it at yours as well. So, well, that's true, Coach. And I said, wow, okay. So I went home and told my wife, I said, Tony says I have to come to every one of your appointments now. And she said, you could tell Tony to relax. You don't have to be at every one. And I'm like, I'm not sure he wants to hear that. So the next day I went back in. I said, hey, Coach, I talked to my wife. She said to tell you to relax. I don't need to be at every one. He goes, no, you're going to go to every one. I don't care what she says. And so that's real. That's not rehearsed. That's not management 101. That's not out of some coaching manual. And so that's a culture of action, like of verbs, not of nouns hanging on a wall. And that's how you set it. And you don't need to talk a lot about it when you're first talking about it, but situations arise like that. And you go, oh, not that anybody thought Tony hasn't told a lie in his life, but not that anybody thought Tony was kidding or lying. But so that's how you set it. And now imagine how you go to work and you're accountable to each other. And Tony, going back to his Pittsburgh Steelers days with Chuck Noll, which is where he got a lot of what he believes. Chuck Noll had a player-led team of these great players, right? And 4 Super Bowls through the 70s and yada, yada, yada. And Tony didn't make it about him. We had a player-led, it was player-led, and they took ownership of it. And so mistakes were handled. I had to do very little to no yelling with guys, because even if I started to, the Jeff Saturdays, the Paytons, the Reggies would just handle it. We got it, John. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of him. Like, all right, I'll give you part of my check too. Like, you know what I mean? And so that takes every day, all the time. And it can be done.
I mean, that's I didn't know that, say, some of the detail that you were talking about in regard to Tony, hearing it firsthand solidifies everything that I had ever heard about he as a coach and just as a man. And I think we're going to get into this a little bit more after, but it really, I think there's this, as Will would call it, a smoothie of sort, where you don't know where one starts and one ends between leadership and coaching. And, if you're a great leader, you can also be a great coach. If you're a great coach, that doesn't necessarily mean there's this cohesiveness that when you have these two things working together is really powerful. And it sounds like Tony was both an incredible leader and an incredible coach.
Well, yeah, look, it's who and how you're being when you show up. Not fake it till you make it, not that nonsense. Who and how are you being in the context of this environment now, authentically? Not, this is just me, take it. I mean, authentically. Are you in congruence with reality? Mm-hmm. And now, you could also be just a great dude and a great leader and completely incompetent at the work. And that makes you a great dude and a great leader and a bad coach. Right? You could be a great coach and a completely incompetent, toxic leader. That makes you a bad leader. So you need both, and you need environment and you need the human to kind of fit. Everybody's talking about safe space and psychological safety, and that's beautiful and awesome and real. At the same time, if you think the world is going to create safety for you as you walk around because you're you, that's inconsistent and incongruent with reality. So it's who and how you're being when you show up. And then the environment, let's set the environment, right? So there's a smoothie. there's a yin and yang. There's a rhythm. There's the mosh of it. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Speaking of yin and yang, Will, what is, throughout your time with various teams, and when I say teams, I mean the martial art teams, but also, you've been a part of a martial artist, not just, multiple. What have you found to be, that's a distinctive success for that team, that culture that you are a part of?
In all my years of experience, I can say, people always talk about leaders, which I concur with. Side note, his wife is a rock star of a doctor. So it's, for understand what didn't see or what that's her specialty, and really she's had a very storied career throughout her travels, and I've heard many stories and so from other in their travels. Joke is I don't believe she exists, because no one would marry John. Kudos to her for doing that. And all our jokes aside, it shows John's caliber, whether it's and other hand business and treated people. His judo instructor Shimamoto, they are all pillars and experts and rock stars in their field, and self-driven and self-motivated. So what I'd like to, in terms of my experience, is lowest man on the totem pole, or bottom of the barrel, is trying to uphold, elevates everyone. And my uncle used to have a student who was a don with us, and is the equivalent of a black belt. But in my grandfather's system, we don't have a black. Wanted to symbolize a black belt in our family. So it's more dons, or there's a midnight blue, and their original belt system was based off of 4 seasons. So in order to truly develop, you have to cycle through 4 seasons throughout your whole career. So you have to recycle back to a beginner, winter, and before everything sprouts up later, fall, spring, summer, all that. And Sam was a don with us, but he was an older gentleman, and he wasn't particularly flexible. But the one thing, and my old training partner Jay and I, we still talk about Sam Maxwell very fondly. We all respected him because we would hear him talking to himself, going, "Come on, Sam, don't quit. 2 more." And and I was a child, so I was young, so conditioning wasn't an issue just by the nature of my age, right? And so I wasn't winded, but to see this man next to me truly push that standard of, I started martial arts late in life. I wasn't born flexible. I wasn't born with the ability to lift my leg that high, but the tenacity and grit that this man exuded every day garnished the respect and made an impact on people like myself and my training partners growing up, going, man, we have to put that much work in order to really polish what little gifts we were given. And that's when I see that, I think that's really important. And that's what I've seen in common today with any athletic team. When I went to the ring to work with their Olympic wrestling team, and the women were ranked number 1, the men were ranked number 3 at that time. And they told me in advance they had a couple bands. I asked what kind of equipment they had, and I looked over, and there are a couple like worn out tubings that you could buy at a sporting goods store, not even like the layered jump stretch, elite bands. Like, we're talking crappy tubing, and they warmed up by taking a little soccer goalie that was about knee high and kicked a little Walt Disney princess ball around, playing soccer without keeping score. That was the extent of their warm up, was kicking a Disney ball into a soccer goalie. Number 1 in the world, right? They had a culture when we went out where they protected the youngest in a club. They protected it when we ate. They always looked out for the eldest, always looked out for the youngest. So my point being, is humble as they are, they were still the best because of the grit. Me, of a fundamental thing that everyone could take away from is hard work.
One of the things that I've asked many of the people I've had on the podcast is, is it do they think it's nature versus nurture, right? And when I asked my very first mentor in this business, Mike Boyle, that question, he offered I thought a great response in 2 ways. One, he said that what we do as coaches becomes a multiplier for what they've got from a talent standpoint. That talent alone will get you. So he kind of used 2 scales, 0 to 10. And he said, if I've got a guy who's an 8 in talent, but a 4, let's say, in effort or, culture, or whatever you want to, he's basically a 32 out of 100. But he said, if I've got a guy who's a 5 in talent, but he's a 10 in work ethic and in will, like what you were talking about, and in hard work, and he's a 50. So, you can really be a multiplier. So that was one. And then he used his work with the Red Sox during the championship run as another example. He said, there were certain things that I just knew as a strength coach, like we're good and like we should be doing. And he goes, but guys just didn't want to do it. So he tapped into, let's say, the leaders of the team at that point. It was David Ortiz. It was, some of the, the Pedro Martinez, and said, look, I don't really care if we lift a whole bunch of weights, but can we, at the very least, can we do a little bit of foam rolling? Like, can we get you to feel good before, like, you go out on the field? Whether the foam roll works or whether it doesn't, at least maybe you feel good. And he's like, I need your help in getting that out there. And it was tapping into these guys to help create this culture of, all right, look, at the very least, we go down there, we touch the foam roll, maybe we do a little bit of this, and then we go out on the field. And then that like grew into some other things. So it sounds as if that is similar for both of you in ways, John, with your story of, Saturday and Manning going, no, we got this, or, Will, you going out with protecting the young. Like, I mean, I wonder, can that be fostered? So maybe that's like, after all that long-winded, in your opinions, can that be fostered?
Well, first of all, Mike, another proud Springfield graduate.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
The anecdote you just recited relative to Mike is Mike being a black belt at what he's doing. In your 20s, you're just trying to show them all how much you know, and you're going to save the world, and that's great, and that's normal, and that's congratulations, you're right on schedule, and I don't know, but I bet Mike would agree. So that's Mike being through the ring and back, and earning, making enough mistakes, I'm sure, just like we all have, to realize that. I don't believe that. I don't believe somebody comes out of the womb and are pronounced a leader. It's a skill, right? It's why we see in every industry somebody going from an unbelievable technician of some kind, and then we put them in a leadership role, and we're like, what the hell happened? Well, you hired them for a role that had nothing to do with their previous, just because they were a master. We see this all the time, right, in the NFL. Unbelievable defensive coordinator, can draw plays up, the genius of plays. And then we get into a leadership role, and they're two different skill sets. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And so the technician on the factory floor, who now has nothing to do with that, but he was good at doing that work, that's not the work you're doing. Right? So it's a skill set. That's where I think the line is. And then, do you want that skill set? Do you want to be? Leadership is thankless. It's lonely. It's tough. It's challenging. And when it goes well, the credit's not yours. And when it goes poorly, you better wear it. And there's not a lot of metrics and ROI and all the fancy corporate terms to say, oh yeah, it's working. The leadership stuff is working. But we're like, it just feels better around here. Things are happening around here, or there's cohesion, or there's collaboration, or there's communication, there's accountability, there's healthy disagreement, there's all these things. And the spreadsheet people, God love them, and we need them. Otherwise, we'll go out of business real quickly. But there's no ROI for it. There's no metric. There's no line item that says leadership equaled this. So it becomes this thing. That's why everybody's looking for it. That's why it's so poor all over. And I'm not saying I got it figured out. I don't. Nobody does. Somebody tells you they got that figured out is lying or completely out of reality. But that's what it is to say this person, they're a natural leader. That's almost insulting. You see a great leader, tell them they're natural. They may have I don't know that I just grew up like this. Like, I worked at this thing, and I wanted to be dragged through the mud. And not everybody wants it, and it's fine. It's not for everybody. Just because you're the quarterback doesn't mean he's also a great leader. May or may not be true, So, good on Mike.
Yeah. Speaking of, leadership, there's something that you said, JT, and it reminded me of something that Will has said maybe since the first year I've known him, just in a different way. You were saying was anybody can lead during calm seas, but what true leadership, it's visible during the storm. And Will has a saying that we train for war in times of peace, and this is it's easy to train in, calm waters. But, what does training really look like when the going gets tough? So brings me to the next, which is this they should know mindset, whether it's a leadership standpoint of they should know this, or will from a coaching standpoint, for you being, whether it's working with a team or working with a high level individual, going, they should know. How would you like to address the coaches, the leaders, the organizations, the parents even? And maybe I would inverse it to the athlete in regard to the parent, the coach, it works both ways as far as I'm concerned. This they should know. So, Will, how would you address the notion of, coaches saying they should know in regard to training their athletes?
Well, I think people of shared ability should be synergistic. The success, right? Is it how much is it due to the parents? How much is it due to the individual child? You know, we don't argue. We don't waste time arguing how much is genetics, how much is gifted, how much is predisposed. As we always say, Ben, as you're familiar with, what's your 2%? And I want to use one of my old training partners, John. I called him Jay, John F. Cuoco. And when 9/11 happened, he signed up right away, even though he was in his 40s, because he was so paged at what had happened. And he had martial arts school, and one of his students, 11 in the towers, Joe Sacerdote. And uh, so he was so very late in life. And he retired the highest ranking Marine Affairs unit because he designed the civil affairs program, the Marine Corps in Quantico. And he was in Fallujah, Iraq when it was hot, and he was part of a 5-man insurgent team. Sent him everything from Blu-ray DVDs to candy to sure he got a kettle so he could work out while he was out there. And he set up on the reason why I bring him up is on his school wall in a giant placard was about the men in the arena. Who counts, but it's in the arena, right? Whether they failed or not. We are such a culture where it's so easy to take orders, to give orders. A very immature thing to do. It's either someone very elderly or someone very bratty in regards versus someone who complains, what are they willing to do about it is my question. If you have such issue with, what are you willing to do about it? And if you're not willing to participate in that, then you really have no right to say anything, because you're then practicing agency. You're stressed about something that you do anything about anyway, or choose to do anything. And Jay produced and inspired so many young that a few ago I was out to dinner. It was about a week and a half ago, and these two gentlemen group texted me the Air Force because of Jay, and they each had very distinguished careers. One's still a career Air Force person, and retired and now a Delta pilot. And he had a layover Virginia, and he had dinner with Scotty, had a dinner with, and they sent me a picture of together because I just had breakfast with Scotty in April, and some odd years since he was a kid. Now he's a grown man. So you talk about can this be culture be taught? Yes, because Jay created school. He created it for the Marine Corps. And then even though these young men didn't go to the Marine Corps, they went to the Air Force. And the camaraderie and the brotherhood of looking out for each other and still being friends to this day and still keeping in touch is such a culture. No different. John wouldn't teach people how to tie shoes their sneakers properly, or how to wear their socks shape a certain way. You're creating a culture, just like taking pride in your dress blue, or because now, and this interview I saw with with Freddie Roach recently, and he said one of the significant things, subtle yet significant things Freddie did that influenced GSP in his career was he said, "We are going to do this. We are in a fight now. We are going to stop doing this, and we're going to throw the left hook." And then when he listened, he actually knocked the opponent out, Michael Bisping. So, but GSP was like, "Where did you come with this we philosophy?" Right? And he said, "I felt that it helps people not feel alone. And the only way, and even that's what training is. Training is about neurologically recruiting more muscle fibers, making them move faster, grow bigger, uh, be able to take more force quickly, right? Plyometric, explosive, 1 rep max, all sorts of communication with the body in relation to movement, your sport, and your activity. So that's what important training is really about. About on my pull-ups or swinging a baseball bat or or my lung. I have great technique, but I can only last for 2 minutes, and I'm fighting in a right. So I that is collectively so important to create a culture, whether it's an MMA gym, whether it's a local YMCA. And I think John has a wonderful story. We may ask him to tell it about the one time he conceded to his sons to actually coach one of their teams, and and what they emphasized as value. Because again, everyone, what's value as a winning season, a championship, right? A regional, state, national, right? Or what John did as a coach. Okay, and I'll let him tell an example of creating culture. John, you want to take it away?
Yeah, but I think that I'm glad, Ben. It's a word, this should word that you brought up. It's if we could abolish it from the language, it would do us all better. Have you ever seen anything move the needle following the word should? Spoken by anybody. In sport, in relationship, on a sideline, work, school. It is right, like we're human beings. Everything begins in conversation. And so when you should becomes some narrative of how you think it ought to be, or some defense mechanism, like how many times have we seen coaches on a sideline utter something like, "You should know this, we went over it in practice." Now, we're all about process, we're all about right process, and we have to be. And outcome does matter also. The outcome was they didn't do it, or they did do it. There's kind of no other outcome. You did it or you didn't. Or, you know what the third one is? You have the narrative about why you did it or didn't do it, or why it got done or didn't get done. And the coach screaming about, "You should know this, we went over in practice." I said, it's about who and how we're being as coaches. This is a coach who now got concerned with how they look because some player or the team or whatever it is, whoever is in their charge, didn't get the outcome. You should know this. Like, okay. And I don't, or I didn't. Maybe I didn't get it. Maybe I'm shitty. Maybe you're shitty. It's all narrative. And this word should brings about nothing of use except our own fears and anxieties and the way we want to look. Well, you should have taught it to me. I'm working with a guy right now around a massive youth sports organization who's talking about my staff should have known this. And I'm like, maybe. Do they? Well, they said they don't. It sounds like they don't then. Sounds like everything else is a narrative about it. Like, so if you could grant, like, you know, if you could grant people to lose that word, I think there would be some better progress and a little self-reflection. Well, I taught it to them 10 times. Maybe they need 11. Or maybe you suck at teaching. I don't know. Here's what I do know. They didn't do it. Like, let's figure that out. Because you can call them dumb, not trying, this one did. That's your team. You know, my wife tells me I should do a lot of things. How's that go? You know, so you got me. It's a beautiful. I encourage you to keep bringing that word up with folks, and just to bring some awareness, because we all do it, right? That guy should drive faster in front of me. Okay, sure. Because you're late. Okay. Anyway, I think Will, just to spin it to what you might be referring to, and lead me if I didn't continue it the way you intended. I was done in Indianapolis coaching. I told my kids, I'm your dad. I'm not your coach, but I'm going to be, I'll be there. I'll be at game, I'll be watching and enjoying the hell out of it and all that. And you won't hear a peep from me. And then one year they were in 7th and 8th grade, and them and their friends asked me, said, Mr. Torine, will you coach us in rec basketball? I said, no, I'm not coaching rec basketball. I'm good. Like, I'm enjoying this. And then so my kid said, oh, come on, Dad, coach us. I said, okay, you guys aren't starting. Still want me to coach you? And they were like, what? Yeah, you're not starting. We still got a contract or no? Yeah, okay, that's fine. And so is that what you were talking about, Will, that piece?
Yes, but I also like the culture of the ended layup.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we had my kids, they, how do I say? They could both do left-handed layups because I didn't mess with them. They just did it, right? And I didn't have anything to say about it unless they asked or whatever. So when you're free to make mistakes and free to play, it kind of opens you up a little bit, right? It doesn't mean you ignore that you jumped off the wrong foot. It just means you're free to actually learn it and problem solve yourself. And so when I coached, I made a rule. We were practicing. I said, okay, like a typical layup lines, right? And I couldn't believe almost no kid could do a lefty layup. They were doing everything but a lefty on the left side. And I'm like, what in the hell's going on here? Like, and it took me a while to realize that they're simply afraid. It's not because they can't, right? They're afraid, they're looking at me like, oh, so they just got to, I said, look, we're going to do lefty layups, and you're going to do it. You're going to jump off the right foot and do it with the left hand. And I do not care if the ball goes in the basket or not. You can test me. I'm just telling you, I do not care. What I do care about is you jumping off the right and shooting with the left. Other than that, I don't care. I don't care if the ball goes in the stands. I really don't. And in a game, if you're on the left side and you do anything but shoot the proper lefty layup, like the most fundamental old school lefty layup, you're coming out. Whether it goes in or goes out or doesn't go in, you're coming out. If it's the game winner, you're coming out. There's a second left. And so we practiced lefty layup, and the balls were flying I was getting hit like it was insanity. And we, did different things. I took their sneaker off of one shoe, so they, just put in different little constraints so they could get it, whatever. And eventually it became fun. Like we were laughing about, oh man, that ball, I never seen a ball fly out of the gym like that. It was insane. And they finally, then they were getting it. And I was also proving to them that working on something in the process, the outcome will come. And, lower the baskets and all the other things. And then we finally get into a game, and one of the kids who just, couldn't walk and chew gum he's got an open frickin' steal or whatever. He's going down a court. Nobody's around. And he's on the left side of the court. And I'm like, is this kid going to, because I had to come on the right? I'm like, is this kid going to come down and what's he going to do? And sure as shit, he came down and he hits a lefty layup like the old Hoosiers movie. And everybody went freaking bananas. And even the parents were like, what is going on? Like it's the middle of some rec game. And everybody's going at the kids. And it was, he made it. Because I yanked kids that didn't. I already had done that. Get out. Yeah, it went in. No, I know it went in. I could clearly see it went in. That's not what I'm interested in. And then when he did that, it was amazing. It was a really cool moment. But it comes from instilling that, and then the kids know. No, wrong hand. Like, I pulled, you do a little Tony Dungy. Pull back, let them. And I'm talking about middle school. Like they're not done. They're middle school kids. They're fine. So, but anyway, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. So that teachable moment stemmed from fear. We see this like, Will, I know you see it too with folks. One of the things that the lines that I love in the gym is, I'm afraid to come in the gym because I'm not in shape. And
delicious piece of irony there.
Yeah, I think what you did, JT, of removing the fear, that speaks so much to the environment and the culture, and that in and of itself is a leadership thing. And I know that Will has worked with folks who they're like, what I would love, Will, is if you could speak to the folks that are fearful because they've been injured, because they've been either have been injured or have had folks that have heard about other people being injured, working with a coach, and not just injured, but just have had bad experiences, and everything in this root of fear. And what is your strategy from a coaching standpoint and training standpoint of overcoming the fear with them?
So, to me, I think a lot of injuries, people look at the hardware. I have a bum knee. I have a bad hip. My lower back is I think software issue, right? That's why John was talking about, head down versus head up type of training or focus. And I really like what JT said about should, because another word he used earlier in the interview was congruence. If you don't have congruence with reality, right, you're going to have problems. And to me, should is a outcome that you expected for whatever reason that didn't come true. And if you can't pivot, you're not even tapping into your nature, which is adaptation, right? It's not about the strongest will survive, but it's the most adaptive. Because if it were the strongest, Neanderthals would be the dominant species right now because they were super athletes. They were more heavy, thicker bones, but because they were like such, they weren't able to survive starvation and food as we. So what turned to be an advantage turned into a disadvantage. These are the superior race. You know what Hitler had envisioned, right? All uber athlete, genetic athletes, but in reality, men cannot design that in that regard. When you ask about fear relation, what I lefty layup is to me, that's neurologically addressing you, which is my non-dominant side. I'm not very good at, and I'm not confident. So I'm going to, and by hitting the elephant room, right? You hand all your attributes. And what I used to tell my daughter when about school is apparently going to be good at certain subjects. Ones you struggle with are be the things you learn the most from. It was I will never expect you to get an A in something that you are really struggling. But what I do expect you to do is show up and learn something difficult and move the needle to improve from where you're at to a little better. And the litmus I gave her, which I didn't care about, but it was a marker that evident overall GPA. If you're struggling with the C or a 3, whatever the scoring, a letter system, I don't care. But if you make a C into a C plus or a B minus or a 2 into a 2.5 or a 2.75 in your weakest side, it raises your overall GPA for the things that the attributes that you were excellent and that you're better suited for. And that's how I address training, to wire people to be the thing that they are most afraid of, but not pressure them to do a full range or a full body. That's why we do fractional or ratcheting. We tell people, okay, squat to where you feel comfortable, right? And get really good at that, because organically, as you fatigue and your body starts to cohesively entrain and develop a rhythm, you will end up expanding your range of motion organically without even realizing it, right? And we could do that by taking the top portion, taking the bottom portion, taking the eccentric, dissecting the actual construction of the or the movement, putting fragments like like, hey, I picked up the kale and the celery and the apples for the smoothie, but eventually we're going to start putting it together. And when you trick them into like peanut butter jelly, or I can't use this analogy much anymore, but when I used to train a lot back in the day, I used to use Dagwood was a comic in the newspaper, and he was notorious for eating at night, stress eating, and building these monster sandwiches, with multiple layers, right? Like cheese and turkey and another layer of lettuce and tomatoes and bologna. And that's how I view training, just like building combinations for striking. Is you start with like a 1-2, a jab cross, and then you don't just put in more punches. You add a slip or a weave or a feint, and then a hook. So to have that combination where it's not just all meat, you have some condiments in there. You have some bread in there. You have some cheese. You have some sliced tomato. You have. So that's how I take I gear shift them down to something manageable for them, and then build their confidence back up to show organically that they can improve. And surprising when I work with people is oftentimes, because I do a lot of body movements as assessments, people say to me, oh, my non-dominant side is actually better. And I say the reason being so, and it's not 100%, but statistically it's a pretty high average, is because your non-dominant side is very collaborative. Whereas your dominant side says, I don't need the rest of the body to pick up a tea kettle or to cut a scissor or to write something. Whereas the other one goes, I don't know what we're doing. Tell me when to go. Tell me when to move. So it's a better teammate. It's just like the all-star athlete who's not a great teammate because they're like, you guys are here because of me. I'm the best player in the league. You guys wouldn't be winning if it weren't for me. Like that kind of mentality. And that's what I've noticed when it comes to movement. So teaching them how to elevate their weakness, or as John did, to coordinate your non-dominant side with your dominant side as part of the language, right? Makes them more exposed and more familiar to fail, not afraid to be subpar and move that needle. And that's what prohibits learning in later age. It's not the age. It's the myopic dialogue that says, because of my age or because I'm short, bald, and Korean, I can't jump high or do this or do that. So I think that narrative of exposure is important. And part of that is some people intuitively, like John, starts to surround himself with certain people getting this education. And he had this student. And last time we were talking, he was thinking about working for this company, and then he connected with someone from Springfield College, and he happens to be working for that company already. So what a coincidence. But that's because of all the work, right? That he's in position, right? And it's who you know, but the concept that I really like to emphasize is how well you know someone. So it's not whether you know the person.
Bill's got to pay his internet bills. They don't have it in Pennsylvania.
Especially where he's at.
He's on a phone line.
So while he's coming back, one of the things that I think is interesting that he brought up, and I know you can speak to this because of your various roles that you've had in once you finished in the NFL and you've been a part of youth development and such, Will, what I was saying was I thought your points were so valid because what I find and what I see frequently, and I know JT has experienced the same, is that kids across the board are afraid to fail, and they're not encouraged enough to practice. We've set up youth sports now where the number of games, the number of showcases, the number of recruiting exposures is more important than the practice itself. The practice is not as encouraged as opposed to just a box to check. So, JT, my question to you is, what is your message to the player, the parent, the coach, the organization about practice in general and this education of development and how that relates to this outcome that's over here that we so are focused on and less here?
Yeah, I mean, look, if I had that answer, it's really cute to talk about how we used to play till the lights, till the whistle for dinner came, and we're not going back to that. We're not, much as we want to sensationalize that. The first question to ask is, there's a couple things. I mean, you pointed to a lot of people on what I call in the athletic care who's around this human being, not this mini adult, this child, who's around them in athletic care. And I don't mean like physical therapists, and I mean them too. But athletic care can be a parent, an administrator, a coach, an athletic director, strength conditioning coach, who's ever around this child, the other parents, things like that. Like, why are we doing this? And ask your child. So I ask a lot of parents. It's a very interesting. Can be a tough question. One of the questions I ask the parents, because invariably a parent will say, "Oh no, they love it. They love it." Well, I mean, other than when they're really, really young, they kind of know you spent a lot of money. That's if you can even afford it. I work in the most marginalized communities in our country right now with kids that are all in, playing in free programs and all that. And that's actually what goes on there on those fields and courts and things is some of the most beautiful, real sports. Not, oh, that's nice, here's some money, like real stuff, real coaching, real caring, real camaraderie and teamwork, for the purpose of, by the way, as we started out, fun and fulfillment and enjoyment and development, right? And let me spin around here a little bit, and I'll come back to the question that I asked parents. Parents that have the money go, oh, that's a cute rec league and that's great and all that. And they go, where's the competitive stuff? Much like the word should, there's another little word that ought to be thrown out, and it's called or. Competitive or fun. Why or? Why not and? I don't know anybody successful that's not competitive. And I don't mean competitive like stepping on your face so I can get better. I mean like the actual definition of competition and competitive, which is we actually need each other to grow. How could I even get better if my competitor isn't across from me? It's impossible. I need that. So this is one thing that, well, over here, it's serious stuff over here. It is serious stuff, right? By the way, 97% of kids are done playing in high school, right? It's a terminal experience. And Derek Jeter and the three of us can play in the same bar league softball league right now because he's done. He's not playing for the Yanks anymore. He can sign up for the same league we signed up for. It's a terminal experience. So one question is, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? The child knows you spent a bunch of money, like a bunch of money. This is if you have the money. And then he said, well, they love it. And then I want you to ask them, do they love it or do they love that you love it? Like, do you say we have a game this Saturday or do you say my child has a game this Saturday? When you say we have a game this Saturday, I'm a bit concerned. He or she has the game. You have the job of a parent. You've got nothing to do with it. It's for them. Yeah, but I paid a bunch of money. That's on you. And so they know this. And if you ask them, do you love that I love it or do you actually love it? It's a really nuanced question because, of course, they're loving that you love it. It might be the only time you're present with them. Maybe. I don't know. But they do get a lot of attention from you around this thing with a bat and a ball or a field or a pool or whatever. So that's one thing. At the end of the day, none of us are going to be able to stop this monster called private equity and NIL and all of these other things. Nick Saban is having trouble stopping it or navigating it, right? And he needs to do it. What we have are the person in front of these children that have the privilege and the responsibility and a platform to stand in front of them and be called coach. And so again, who and how are they being when they stand in front of this child? And who and how are you being as a parent in the stands? If you can just sit down for a moment and just let it be, they're not a reflection of you. whether they hit a home run or whether they struck out. It's not a reflection of you, nor is it a reflection of their identity either, by the way. They're the one that strikes out all the time. That's nice. That's nice. Let's continue to label folks. So why are we doing this? What is the purpose? And if this is all the relationship is about, like, and I'm not criticizing, I've made all the mistakes. It's taking a look. Just take a look. And so when I talk about these coaches or the people, right, I always say, by the way, the same year I signed up to coach rec basketball, I also went to get a library card, and it took me longer to get the library card than it did to sign up to coach basketball, which means as long as you're not a sex predator in this country, you can coach. That's a ridiculous standard. To stand in front of your kids. So I'm able to stand in front of your kids, I pass a background check, and I'm going to be with them in a gym, saying whatever I'm saying, being however I'm being. So who and how are we being, and what are we modeling as we show up? Tony modeled faith, family, and football. Not to say, look at me. That's who and how he's being. And so I'm really, really hyper aware and sensitive to this human being standing in front of our children, or this human being standing in front of our pros. I've had more players in my office complaining about coaches than I've had them doing anything else in my office in the pros. And I've seen the arc of the athletic experience from 3 years old to 75. And it ends, and nobody should have a telethon for any former athlete. But when it, we all talk about it's your identity. Well, who allowed that? Or even in school. Oh, that's the funny one. That's the smart one. That's the dumb one. That's the class clown. Now you're going to wear that narrative because you believed it. Like, I'm looking at the adults to take a look, listen to your language, and get training. Like school teachers are the most unbelievably trained people in the world. Like, look at what they're doing instead of complaining about how bad the schools are. Bit of a soapbox, a lot of stuff there. I'd love to be able to train the systemic, the takeover of private equity. I don't think that's a job I can do. But we can help who's standing in front of them, whether it's strength coach in the weight room or whatever it is. Like, do you know how many things I've said to guys that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I even, like think about that. Because we all can remember a coach or a professor or a teacher or that we had that something got tattooed on our brain that they said. And man, did it cost us thousands in therapy. And another put something here. And man, it's the reason we went on to do anything in life. Like those words. Yeah.
There is a topic that comes up a lot in coaching, a lot in parenting, whether parents want to see it or not, and certainly in organizations, and also players, which is ego. And when we talk about ego, there's a lot of fear around ego. And, Will has kind of coined a phrase, FIGO, around that. And one of the things I toward the end of this now conversation that I'd like to address is this ego portion, how it ties to fear, how it ties to our ability to shift and change and actually make a difference. So, Will, when it comes to ego and this quote unquote need to be right, or how do you see ego in terms of the training, and how do you overcome that for the success of the individual.
Well, we talk about these little phrases like, fear segregates, love integrates kind of thing, and doing things for fun, right? I think a lot of people, and even what John said about we, in terms of we don't have a game our child, that's where we have this dynamic. Think about longevity training. A lot of us, as we age, we the issues, the first thing we need to do to resuscitate, you well know, better, CPR series, which is to basically get blood able to funnel force through. So health is about like transfers through the body, not hemorrhaging out the knee, and it's also a metaphor too. Cut me off. This guy should be driving faster. I'm really pissed. We're all human. We get upset within the moment and it's gone. But if I'm still talking about it 2 hours later or 2 days later, someone might say it's not healthy. I should probably let it go, right? And so that being said, we need that function just like our body constantly filter and function and flow, right? And the final thing is then that conversation where the peristalsis, or the pump of the body, whether it's your heart, your digestion, your muscle contraction, your connective tissue, is sharing the load, is sometimes alternating. Just like John and I, if we go out to eat, oh, I got this time, you got last time. It's not always one way, right? And that's the way it should be. Just like with the parents, it's like if you had a failed athletic career, again, you should not live vicariously through your child. You should basically support the enthusiasm of your child, whatever facet of the game or the camaraderie, or just even go to party afterwards. A motivator for someone to get more activity, and they should just be happy that their child is getting more activity. And what I like about years back, I remember John called me really incensed because he received information about a athletic program in over like one, and his kids were no longer in the program, so it didn't affect his children at all. He was so incensed that there was such a push for just more on top of more. It's like, no, they need fundamentals. He felt meeting and advocated. He did not mention his background. He did not talk about his you want to talk about it. He just went as a concerned, not even parent of a child in the program, but just a concerned, Dungy with, hey, we're going to service and that's what John did as a good citizen. Unlike the ending of finale, right, where they were not the Good Samaritan law, right, Ben, is in fact making fun of, right, and that is ego and Figo, because Figo is basically under-overing things. We tend to under-over things to compensate competence, right? Forget about confidence, right? So we either puff ourselves up too much, or we degrade ourselves. Like, I could never that stupid. It could never be me. The shoulda, coulda, woulda, as John said. So we're looking, like John said, to coach your program. Where are we at? What's the reality? And then from there, then we can have an honest assessment of improvement. And none of us against other people. The original, from what I understand, is Conan Patir, which is to seek together, because we love lifting weights. Or from there, diverge. But the whole point is we should be competing against an ego, because that is an obstacle for us just achieve what we truly are targeting. And I think that goes back to John and Ben. Did you ever read the Inner Game of Ten by Tim Galloway?
Yeah, great stuff.
Right?
No, I
And
haven't.
his basic premises were all premises were to get out of our own ways, right? And when he was challenged, on a news back in the day, he's still alive, I believe. And back in the day, to coach a newbie to tennis shape. So the woman the night before was like, "Yeah, I don't think I want to do this because she's not in shape and she's never played tennis and she's going to be on national television." All Tim Galloway basically said is, when you see the ball bounce, I want you to say bounce. And when the ball comes towards you, I want you to say hit. So bounce, hit. So all he had this person focus on, bounce, hit. He didn't say hold the racket this way or do this or stand this way or do that. He just said bounce, hit, bounce, hit. And there's such a purity to that in terms of coaching, right? To let, again, the child express their interests, their concerns, and really get at the root of their performance impediments and their obstacles. Some of them genuine and some of them imagined, right? And we need to learn to discern between the two, or some that can be addressed later and something that's a priority now. And that should be a shared discussion. That shouldn't be just dictated by the coach or the parent or just by the athlete alone. So it's a group effort, right? It takes a village on that thing.
Ben, you're bringing up great word. I'm not trying to be funny. What is ego? Like, what is this distinction called ego?
Are you asking?
I'm asking. I don't have an answer.
No.
I think.
I don't typically ask questions I know answers to.
Well, for me, I believe our I think what you said in the beginning, that all three of us would have different quote unquote definitions of it. My thought process, let's say, when I ask the question in regard to ego, is this notion of like a positive negative, almost like insecurity, but mixed with like the experience. So like your experience has afforded you the ability to say, I at least can do this. I can give it a shot. Whether you want to call that, confidence, maybe confidence is the better word to use. I typically associate ego more on a negative connotation than a positive one.
Gotcha.
What I don't have a definition, but what I do like in terms of ego, what I like to envision, JT, is in every police drama, movie, show, whatever, they put someone in witness protection, right? And there's only a handful of people who know where the person is located, or the safe house is, and somehow the bad guys still find them. So that tense scene where all the people who knew are in the same room and are looking at each other trying to figure out who's the rat or who's the mole, right? I think of ego that way because sometimes they are an ally, depending on what the objective is. And other times they can really screw things up for everybody, right? Including themselves, right? But they think they're benefiting by whatever transaction. And I think that tense moment is so well played out in many ways that people can kind of question, not negative or benefit, because sometimes you need some belief. Sometimes you need that kind of boldness to try things that most people have never tried. So I think ego is kind of like ascertaining and trying to get as many allies to support you in your supposed shared goal, which is a form of congruence, right? Like you talk about reality, and if the person's not congruent with reality, how about are we congruent with what we're trying to achieve here, right? Like, does your son actually want to win the rec league tournament, or they happy with a lefty layup, which again was instilled in such a beautiful way, and I love that story. And I think that should be written into a script for a sports movie, really, because I think it makes no sense, but to the team, like you said, the parents, why are you guys cheering so much, right? Like you would have guys won the championship when this kid made a lefty leg, but because we're in the arena, because you guys were in all the practices and saw how wild the balls got, and they weren't even anywhere near the basket, and then they trained it enough, right, to face his fear, to face his ego, and something that you talk about being tattooed. He remembered the rest of may be a defining moment that he's not afraid to try new cuisines or try to a different country because of something you instilled in him, or Moto, Dungy, Great Cook, these wonderful people who have influenced you in a wonderful way, John, right? And continue to kind of like instill that, pass that on through your coaching and your exam, I think is a wonderful thing, because we all are these jagged puzzle pieces that are incomplete and flawed. And being a human is a percentage game. It's not a perfection game, it's a percentage. So it's a ratio.
Yeah, well said.
So the last thing I will let's say finish with is in our coaching group, Will came up with this phrase of rant rave resolution, and there's something out there, and if we go along this theme of this whole guy driving, and he's not driving fast enough, if we're using that benign example, right? The rant is this guy should be driving faster. I got to get here. That's the rant. The rave is, well, at least I've got the ability to drive, or it's a beautiful day, or I love my car, and at least I love being in my car. But ultimately, he then alluded to the other thing of the 2%, which is, well, what's my role? Like, what can I do with it? What can I control? What is going to be the resolution that I am, let's say, satisfied with from that standpoint? So what I'd like to do is, from each of you, but from different perspectives, JT, with your perspective or lens in the youth sports, and also the leadership development standpoint, how can what would your one actionable step be for people that want to be leaders? What should they do? And then Will, from a training perspective, what would your actionable step be for someone who is looking to make a change and looking to make an improvement or shift, and they're not really sure what that step is?
You want me to go?
Sure.
I don't know what they should do. But so a couple things. As human beings, we make decisions every day. We take actions. We have certain behaviors, right? And those are kind of easy to see on surface. I can, I know the decisions. I can see your decisions or see your actions or your behaviors. And the question really is, what's underneath those decisions, actions, and behaviors? What's underneath that's driving those decisions, actions, and behaviors? So when we talk about that, there's a couple things, and it starts with awareness. Really, awareness is a straw that stirs the drink, right? So you talked about ego before. We all have some relationship with authenticity. You can be in a healthy relationship with authenticity or an unhealthy relationship with authenticity. And authenticity, again, is not, well, that's just the way Will is, or that's just the way Ben is. That's not what authentic, that's just the way I am. That's not what I'm saying. That's actually bullshit. But it's really, are you incongruent? Or how incongruent are you with reality at this time, in this moment? And so we have a persona, we have a self-image, like the conversations we have with ourselves about ourselves, what we really believe about ourselves. And then we have this persona we put out there. And are those authentically related or are they not? And so when you see ego, there's some persona I'm putting out there for the sake of not showing my own vulnerability, not being in an unhealthy relationship with authenticity, or not having any confidence or courage or whatever it may be, that my self-image and my persona are not in alignment. Yeah. And so, but it takes awareness. Now, awareness is having a blind spot, right? So if you say to me, no, John, I know what my blind spots are. Well, that's great. That means we have to redefine what a blind spot is, because you don't know what that means. A blind spot says I can't see it. That's why it's a blind spot. So it takes someone, something, some event, something to reveal or show you a blind spot. Not to say you suck or look how shitty you are, but to go, have you ever noticed this? Have you ever seen this? Boy, you got this persona you put out there. Is that really the conversation you have with yourself about yourself? Or are you just in fear of a single leg deadlift? I don't know, whatever. Or are you in fear of a hard conversation or whatever it may be because of how you'll look, right? So it starts with awareness. Awareness is the straw that stirs the drink. So some kid, or we make a decision or a behavior or an action, but really what is underneath that drove that? That's where you got to look. Not when I was a kid and throwing erasers in the classroom. John, stop throwing the erasers, or you're going to go to the principal. Fantastic, I'll stop throwing erasers. What's underneath why John was throwing the erasers, right? Now, if we look at, so we have that. If we look at this thing, like we're all trying to fulfill on some intention. What's an intention? An intention is a matter we care about. You're asking me, what would I encourage somebody to do? I'm telling you all this stuff here. But now let's move to the second piece. If you can identify an intention that you care about, a matter you care about, feed the homeless, do a better day, I don't care what it is. We all know successful people that are completely unfulfilled. We know miserable rich people. That's not the deal, clearly. So what is the intention? I'm asking you to ask yourself, what intention, what matter do I care about that I want to fulfill on? Great. Got that. Yes, what are the actions I have to take to get there? That's kind of the easy part. Like, what are the actions? And right, okay. But what are the intentions and the matters I care about fulfilling on? Why does that matter to me? Why? Like, why is faith family football? Why that? Why does this matter to me? What's the meaning underneath the intention? Now here's where the rubber meets the road. What are those things that are getting in the way of fulfilling that intention? I don't know. I'm not trying to be cute or funny. I don't know what ego is. Throw ego out for a second. But is my unhealthy relationship with vulnerability getting there? I don't want to put myself out there. Is some anxiety running the show here that I'm just future forecasting and it's getting in the way of whatever I'm doing? Do I lack a healthy relationship with commitment, or is commitment really driving me? What are those human qualities and attributes that are either amplifying or suppressing my ability to fulfill on my intentions? Because the action isn't what's tough. I'm pretty sure most people know broccoli's a better choice than Doritos. I'm pretty sure most people know that. What's getting in the way wasn't the knowledge. What's getting in the way on that, or what are the matters I care about? Because if the next Dorito you ate, you knew for a fact it was going to end your life, I would invite you to consider you probably wouldn't eat that Dorito. Like, it's right. What's getting in the way? It didn't come to that yet, you know? And so this is what I'm encouraging people to do, because we're really, really, really good at the shoulds. Look at them, look at that, look at them. I don't want to get into a whole social media thing. I'm not against it, but right, what are we putting out there? Look at all of these things. Like, let's get some awareness of our own decisions, actions, and behaviors. Not I threw the eraser, but what's underneath it. What is an intention I'm trying to fulfill on? Why is that important to me? Because if there's nothing underneath it, it's going to die. It's going to die. When do people get in the best shape? Class reunions, weddings, not just because they want to. Bad deal at the doctor. Guys got in the best shape in the NFL in their contract year and when they were getting married. Not that they didn't get into, there's just another little lever there, right? Like, so why? I'm not judging you why. I'm asking you what it is. I don't care. It's yours, not mine. I'm just here to bring it to the forefront. I don't have judgment about it. It's yours. I don't give a shit what it is. And so that's what I would encourage. There's a lot what I just said, a lot there, but this is a way of being, not of doing. And being precedes doing. So who and how are you being will precede doing. It's not have the money, then I'll do, then I'll be. It's not do this, get the money, then I'll be happy. It's not that. It's be, do, have. That's it.
Piggybacking off of what John said in regards to awareness being, the stir, what I think is important congruence wise is being aware of the cares that are actually shared. In other words, I never argue with people that they value XYZ, their family, losing weight, building strength, whatever the case may be. I never argue that with them. But what I do point out to them is, hey, you showing up late for your appointment with your trainer, you eating ice cream last night, doesn't show that it is a priority, and it's okay that it's not a priority, right? But let's be clear on the cares being shared, because if you're looking at it from my perspective, this is what it looks like. I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying this is what it looks like. And so John wants to get to the deeper why, like why are you motivated to do this? He's absolutely right, but most people, the why isn't strong enough sometimes or nurtured enough to break that surface, to be self-evident to others. And people are very motivated by class reunions or a wedding or a contract year. So if you can be honest and say something's very superficial, like, hey, a bet that we can do, or for my children, statistically speaking, right, people survive cancer because they have something else to live for, meaning to teach their grandchild how to swim, or they have some type of RuPaul legacy that motivates them beyond themselves or their discomfort that they have to go through in order to survive, right? I think that's really important, is that awareness of the cares, not doubting what your actual cares are, that are being self-evident to others, right? And I think that's why your support group is very important in that, just like an intervention, because everyone's like, don't I embody that? Don't, isn't it obvious to you guys that this is a priority to me, right? Like family, by missing, an appointment or things of that nature, and that's what people are going to say, and that's what we should start with, because that moves a lever, whether it's a perception about image, and then we could negotiate, because life really is a negotiation, right? It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's about negotiating. And what I've been doing lately in terms of training, getting back into training, is just having a negotiation. So if I grab the weight and it feels freaking heavy, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do very few reps with this and focus my form. And then I'll either lighten the weight and do more reps, or I'll increase the weight and do more sets with lower repetitions. But I will have that conversation in the moment with myself. My important thing is knowledge about energy systems. How about just honestly ask myself what it feel like, and what can I actually feasibly do today, right? That honors the one mission statement of losing weight or building muscle, whatever the goal is. And then binary is ice cream better for me or a salad for losing weight. And then have all the dimensional things like, hey, someone the other day said, oh, don't go to the car. I said, I need to get my steps in, was my answer, which is why I was happy to go out to the truck in the parking lot and come back in and get something for someone. And so those kind of cumulative actions, right? Like, I don't mind moving this. I don't mind walking the dog. I don't mind, getting up and getting something from upstairs for you if you need it right now, because that is congruent with my original goal of losing body fat, right? And helping support synergistically the bigger things of eating less ice cream, of going to the gym once a day, and things of that nature. So it starts with the conscious choice, and the awareness is what makes the choice conscious, whether it's within yourself or whether it's socially evident and supported by other, even, your spouse teasing you, oh, I thought you said you were going to lose weight. When, whatever the case may be. And I think that's really important, is the awareness of the cognizant or conscious choice. And you drill that skill, like you said, leadership, anything else, to the point that it becomes second nature. And it seems like you were born with it. And then you have some type of, then that skill is reliable, because you can rely on it when you're sick. You can rely on it when you're tired. You can rely on it as a skill. And I remind people, oh, look at you throw the ball. Look at how many years you've been a chef, how easy that is to cut a knife. You can do that for this. You can do that for running. You could do that for squatting. You could totally, it just takes time and pressure. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Well said. I would like to close by thanking both of you immensely for your time. You've really made the choice to invest a lot of time into this. I'm grateful for your insights and your lessons shared and experiences. And what I'd like to encourage folks to do is see the work that these two gentlemen are doing and take note of the ways in which they are doing their own version of shifting what they're seeking to impact in our performance and longevity. And if it resonates with you, see how they could serve and be of service to you. I know Will is working on and finalizing an app for folks from a training and development standpoint, and it's the notion of meeting someone where they're at and helping them and guiding them to take them where they want to ultimately be. So again, I thank you both. Is there anything that either of you would like to leave us with? Are there any parting words, any golden nuggets that maybe I didn't speak of that we should hear before we depart?
What's the app called? Boomers?
It's called Rabid Anti-Dentites.
Well done. Well done. That's a good place to leave it right there.
It is, and kudos to you, Ben, because the topic of long-term athletic development is something that John is very passionate about, and Ben does on a daily basis. You know, with coaching youth all the through to professional career, from recreational programs all the way up, warming them up to strengthening them. You know, I think that's a very important component because Ben is present with them daily, and I think that should be applauded. Uh, you know, your main gig, not your side gig of podcasting, but your main gig of actually coaching athletes. That's why he is such a student, because he wants to know what he can take from all these wonderful people and actually apply it to his community. So kudos to Ben.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you again. I very much appreciate your time and your energy, and look forward to a continued connection. So thank you.